today's webinar. My name is John Norai. I work in the Professional Development Department here at NASSP, and I'll be your moderator. This webinar is entitled Principal Supervision and Support and is based on the Wallace Foundation publication, Rethinking Leadership, the Changing Role of the Principal Supervisor. We'll focus today on both the critical role of the Principal Supervisor and the critical supports needed for principals. A detailed description of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools 5-year principal induction plan and the 2-year assistant principal plan will be provided, and a brief overview of the district principal pipeline initiative will also be highlighted. Today's presenter is Dr. Ann Clark. She brings a quarter-century of expertise in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools to her role as deputy superintendent. Dr. Clark has held a variety of teaching and administrative positions in CMS since joining the district in 1983. As a teacher of behaviorally and emotionally handicapped children, Clark's extensive education background includes serving as principal at elementary, middle, and high school levels. She most recently served as the Chief Academic Officer overseeing the district's curriculum, professional development, classroom instruction, and school zones. Her achievements in education and the community have been widely recognized. She's been named a Broad Superintendent Fellow, Charlotte Woman of the Year, the Thomas Jefferson Distinguished Alumni Award from the University of Virginia. She was NASSP's National Principal of the Year in 1994, and the William Finley Fellow and Council of Great City Schools Outstanding Urban Educator Award. In 1996, Dr. Clark was the 1994, Dr. Clark was the NASSP Principal of the Year, as I said. So we're especially pleased to welcome her to be a part of our work with the foundation today. Dr. Clark, during this webinar, there may be some folks who will come up with questions, and if they do, I will be interrupting you and posing those questions to you as time goes on, or if we are not at a place where we can insert the questions, we'll save them until the end. Welcome, and like to begin. Thank you for coming. Dr. Clark?
Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be with you and to have a conversation about one of my favorite topics, and that relates to the incredibly important role of the building level principal. And as the Wallace Foundation has recently pointed national attention toward the importance of the principal supervisor, today's webinar will really focus on both principal supervision and the important role that principal supervisor plays, as well as the support systems and structures that we believe, based on our experience here in Charlotte, must be in place in order to ensure both a successful induction of a new assistant principal or principal, as well as the needed support for just the day-to-day role and the critical role that it is of the building level principal. Next slide, please. Before we move into a deeper discussion around the necessary supports for principals and that critical role of the principal supervisor, I feel it's important to just hit pause for a moment and talk about our learnings and our journey with other large urban districts across the nation and our work with the Wallace Foundation to really look at those critical components as a district thinks about building those support structures for the principal and providing the training and support needed for those positions that play a role of supervisor for that building level principal. And so our learnings from Wallace have really pointed us to 4 critical components. And so our journey began 4 years ago as we began thinking as a district about what our leader standards are in CMS and how we align our job descriptions, our training, our hiring requirements, our evaluation, and our professional development to those leader standards. And in just a moment, I'll talk further about our standards as well as the competencies we developed that we felt were unique to the opportunity to lead in Charlotte. The second component that Wallace points us to is the need for high-quality training. And this would include the recruitment, how we select, and the pre-service experiences that are aligned with the expectations for our leader standards and our competencies. So throughout the webinar this afternoon, you're going to hear me frequently use the word alignment because I think it is that alignment of your standards, your pre-service training, your hiring process, and your evaluation, as well as the support systems that are the critical ingredients that point toward a successful principal. A third component that Wallace highlights is selective hiring. How are districts thinking about getting the most qualified applicants and making sure that there is an equally intentional placement of that candidate with the school in terms of the profile that's developed as a vacancy occurs. And then finally, and much of what our webinar this afternoon will be about, is the on-the-job evaluation and support that's necessary once an assistant principal or principal takes on that exciting role at the building level. And you'll notice that I've added at the bottom that fifth component of alignment, capacity, and quality assurance, which are needed to make sure that the four critical components that Wallace spotlights based on their extraordinary research are necessary to have a coherent principal pipeline program. Next. So for just a minute, I want to talk about those leader standards. The state of North Carolina actually has a school executive evaluation that is used by every district across the state. And you'll see across the top of your screen the 8 standards that North Carolina has identified in terms of a successful school executive leading a school. And that would be strategic, instructional, cultural, human resource, managerial, external development, micro-political, and of course academic achievement. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools chose to take this one step forward and to build on those standards some competencies and skills and beliefs that we would be hiring for that align to these 8 standards. And those include, and I won't read them all, but I'll highlight a few based on our experience of what have been those tipping point competencies that have made or break a principal's success in the role. And belief in children is clearly at the top of the list for a reason, not just because it begins with a B, because of my experience tells me that that authentic belief in every child is really a critical ingredient, and it starts at the top with the principal in order to build that capacity and belief in the teachers and other staff members in the school. The second one that I'll highlight is building relationship and influencing others. And as I think about those principals that have struggled in the role in Charlotte or in my experience working with other districts, it is that relationship piece that at the end of the day has often been that competency that could not be developed and was a reason for a person not to continue in that role. And we often think about and talk a lot about the instructional leadership. I believe that is a skill that can be developed, but that belief in children and that building of relationships, that human relation skills are very difficult to develop if the kernels are not already in place as a person moves into that role. Quickly, some of the other competencies that we identified, stamina, initiative, and persistence, that grit that we're hearing talked about again nationally is a critical ingredient for us, as well as a district, we have a significant focus on human capital as a big part of our reform strategy. So the ability of a principal to manage talent and develop talent, we believe, is a skill required for a successful principal here in Charlotte. Next. So as we think about that next component that Wallace talks about, and that is the pre-service experience of a principal or assistant principal candidate, in Charlotte we've chosen to take a proactive approach to this particular component by really seeking our higher ed partners in the region and inviting them to the table to design a program with us for candidates. So you'll see on your screen 4 programs that we've developed over the last 4 to 5 years. The first is a Leaders for Tomorrow program with Winthrop University, which, if your geography is accurate, you would realize Winthrop is not in North Carolina, but actually in South Carolina. But Winthrop has been an amazing partner in really designing a 2-year cohort program that is completely aligned to the district's strategic plan and our instructional priorities. And we have a cohort of approximately 20 to 25 candidates coming out of that program each year. Our second program was a partnership with Queen's University, and is a unique program led by the business school and the executive coaching program at Queen's University in partnership with their education school, and is a smaller cohort model of approximately 15 people, with candidates able to come out with credits toward an MBA, a master's in school administration, or a master's in organizational development. Along the way in our journey in developing these partnership programs, we realized we were struggling to find qualified, capable candidates for the high school principalship. So we actually approached UNC Charlotte about designing a 2-year program specifically for developing high school principals. And we've had 2 cohorts of approximately 15 candidates each that have already yielded 2 high school principals in just the 2 years of the program. And then finally, we have an educational leadership program partnership with Winthrop University and a Master's of Education. I think the key thing I would say to individuals on the webinar this afternoon is that all of these programs are aligned to our district strategic plan. So what does that mean? It means that if we have sheltered instruction observation protocol as our strategy in working with our English language learners, then our candidates in these programs receive that training while they're in the program, not after they get out. Or if we're an inclusive practices district working with our special needs students, again, they get that training while they're in the program. A traditional course like school law is taught by attorneys and general counsel for our district. And yes, they learn about important cases like Brown versus Board of Education, but they also learn that in Charlotte, understanding of the McKinney-Vento law is incredibly important based on the profile of students that are in our district. So you can begin to see how critical that alignment piece is and what it yields in terms of developing that successful principal candidate for our district. And the reason I'm taking a little bit of time at the beginning of the webinar is to stress the point that it is that development of the standards, what it is you expect a principal to be able to do, making sure that your partner programs that are preparing your principal and assistant principal candidates are aligned to your district strategy, and investing time at the design and selection table to make sure those candidates are the ones best ready to come through the program successfully. Next. Once candidates have been prepared through one of our partner programs or other programs, we certainly don't restrict our applicant pool to those candidates graduating from our partner programs, but we certainly have many of those candidates that do. We designed a hiring process that, again, is completely aligned to our leader standards, to the expectations that we have in terms of competencies for principals. So just because a person has a principal license is not a proxy for job readiness for us. Candidates are required to make successful entry into our principal and assistant principal pool, and through that process they become the only individuals eligible to apply when a principal vacancy occurs. So in other words, if a principal vacancy opened tomorrow, only those principal candidates in our pool would be eligible to apply, and that's both for our internal and external candidates. Next slide. So here's where I really want to spend a good bit of our webinar time, and hope that you are formulating your questions and submitting those, and I welcome the opportunity to be interrupted as individuals have questions. But once a principal is selected as a candidate for a particular school, and we do have an extensive selection process which includes the receiving school leadership team developing a profile of the competencies and skills they hope to have in their next principal, principal supervisor screening against that profile, and then the opportunity for the school leadership team composed of parents and faculty and staff, as well as students in some cases at the secondary level, actually interview candidates against the profile they've developed and advance a candidate recommendation toward the superintendent. So there is an extensive process even beyond getting in our applicant pool. But once a principal has been appointed, they're immediately assigned to a professional learning community and assigned a sitting principal, a highly effective sitting principal who becomes their consultant coach for the first 2 years of their principalship. This professional learning community meets on a monthly basis with a curriculum that we've designed with the support of our principal supervisors. This results in our professional learning communities going out to school sites with a focus for a school visit and debriefing as they come in and out of classrooms, looking for a particular skill or strategy that they've been focused on for that particular month. In their second year as a principal, we take our principals through a SAM process, which is an opportunity for them to really think thoughtfully about how they're spending every minute of their school day. Our principals absolutely love this, and we even have principal supervisors that have participated in the SAM process, which involves someone shadowing that principal supervisor or principal for an entire week and coding every 3 minutes, whether the activity they're engaged in is instructional, managerial, or personal. And once that initial time study is analyzed, a plan is put in place, and that principal or principal supervisor is assigned a coach to work with that principal, his or her secretary, and a member of their administrative team to develop a plan that will protect that principal from opportunities that we know come principals' way on a daily basis, minute by minute, that distract them from that instructional focus. As our principals move into their third year, they have an opportunity to spend the year at Queen's University in the business school in an educational leadership institute focused on the idea of becoming a change leader and thinking about how they can affect change at their school, and then as the course progresses to think about ways that they can affect change at the district level as they see practices and procedures that are getting in the way of their success as a principal. In the fourth year, we focus on vision and innovation, and our principals have the opportunity to spend about a half a year at the Innovation Institute, a session that really pushes our principals not only to think out of the box, but to also push the walls of the box as they think about what are the steps that need to happen beyond the quick and easy changes that often happen in those first 3 years. And then finally, in their fifth year as a principal, our principals participate in an exciting year-long capstone program that culminates in a capstone project at the Center for Intentional Leadership here in Charlotte. This is an opportunity to step back and think thoughtfully about their leadership, to think about this notion of intentional leadership and what that looks like both in their personal life as well as their professional life. There's 360 feedback. There's also executive coaching. And then each of the principal candidates has the opportunity to plan and then begin thinking about execution in the summer following their fifth year as a principal, a capstone project, which really is a game changer about looking at their school, thinking about what they're good at, where their gaps are, who they are as a school, who are their partners around the school, and so what is that game-changing opportunity and next step for their school. All the while that our CMS principals are involved in this induction process, our principal supervisors are with them every step of the way. In fact, our principal supervisors were involved in the design of this induction program, and we continue to refine the program based on feedback from our principals as well as our principal supervisors. So in addition to the induction program and the opportunity to be a part of a cohort for the first 5 years of their principalship, our principals have monthly meetings where we bring together all of our principals with an instructional focus or a focus that's aligned to a priority in our district plan. Yesterday, we had one of those district level meetings where we really focused on this notion of a culture of care, which is a part of our strategic plan. In addition, our principals meet on a monthly basis by level, elementary, middle, and high, as a way for them to tackle issues that are level specific. This was a request of our principals that we increase the frequency of these meetings as compared to last year because they find these meetings incredibly valuable, both in terms of the professional development as well as the relevant discussions that are very much about actionable items that they can take back and immediately put in place in their building. And then finally, our principals meet once a month for a half a day with their principal supervisor. And our principal supervisors have oversight for feeder patterns of schools. So our schools are organized in a feeder pattern that feeds a particular high school, and one of our learning communities can have as few as 9 or 10 schools, with a high being close to 28 or 30. This particular year we added additional principal supervisors in an effort to learn from the Wallace research that certainly tells us, and it should be no surprise to any of us, that that smaller ratio of principal supervisor to principal is critical in terms of meaningful coaching and that ability to strike that balance of what we call support and supervision. Next slide. Like we have a program for principals and induction, one of the things our learnings early on was that perhaps there was a need to be more thoughtful and intentional about the induction we do for our assistant principals as they transition most often from a classroom teaching role or a teacher coaching role into that assistant principal position. And I can certainly confess to all those on the webinar that 5 years ago our weakest link in our professional development in the district was really what we failed to do for our assistant principals. So I would invite district folks participating this afternoon to really think about what it is you're doing for those assistant principals and how that can accelerate and improve the readiness of candidates to move into that critical role of principal. So we have designed a 2-year assistant principal induction program, and the first year is spent in monthly meetings that are led by our executive directors and our learning communities, as well as our professional development team. This professional development is focused on the 8 standards of the school executive evaluation, and I would point out that in the state of North Carolina, our assistant principals and our principals are evaluated on the same instrument. So we're really preparing our assistant principals while they're in that assistant principal role around the standards and the competencies that will be expected when they're in the principalship. Now obviously their evidence will be different from that of a principal, but we do believe that that practice has served us well here in Charlotte to have our APs being evaluated against the evaluation tool that will be used when they're a principal. In our second year, our assistant principals attend an academy at Queen's University. This is a 6-day program that's designed to support our APs as they develop an understanding of their leadership and really hone in on their leadership philosophy, how their core values impact the leadership role that they have in the assistant principal position. We also create an opportunity for our assistant principals to be a data collector in our SAM process. That creates an opportunity for them to shadow a principal for 2 days while they're logging in every 3 minutes what that principal is doing. They're really gaining the value of shadowing a principal for 2 days in a school that might look very different from the one that they serve in, or might be even a different grade level configuration to give them exposure. So we see this as an incredible professional development opportunity while providing the district with the much needed data collectors for our SAM process. Next slide. As we think about support and supervision for our principals, clearly there's a need to think about what are the systems and structures that need to be in place for those principal supervisors in order to be able to understand candidates that are in our pipeline, what their preparation is. So the district is in the process of developing over the next year a leader tracking system that will now allow us as a district to have We talk about data-driven decision-making for our principals and our teachers, and so this is an opportunity for our principal supervisors and our folks that work on our human resources team to really use information that we have about candidates in our pool to really think about what is the pre-service training they've had, and to be able to sort candidates in our assistant principal and principal pool based on unique qualifications that are evidenced as a school leadership team develops that profile for a principal. For example, if we're looking for someone who's bilingual or has experience with special needs students or has had experience in a Title I school, this leader tracking system will allow us to enter data as folks are moved into our AP and principal pool and be able to really sort against skills and competencies and be able to look at performance evaluations to find evidence of those competencies. The leader tracking system is aligned to our strategic plan, specifically Goal 2, which is simply to recruit and develop, retain, and reward a premier workforce, of which our principals are, in our mind, a key lever in Goal 2. And then finally Goal 5, which is really to think about ways that we support our principal supervisors in their critical role so they're not having to log unnecessary time gathering background information and can screen for candidates and narrow their pool based on what that profile has taught them. Next. So I want to spend just a minute talking about our focus on the principal supervisor, both in Charlotte as well as in our work as a part of one of the Wallace principal pipeline districts. It's really hard for me to say that the principal is the key lever of reform if I'm not prepared to really talk about the critical role of that principal supervisor. And so one of our first steps in Charlotte was to really look at the job description that we had for the principal supervisor and redefine that role. And I'd certainly be happy to share that job description with any person on the webinar that might like to have a copy of that. We continue to refine that job description. It's about a year old, and we revisit it each year as we continue to try to narrow the focus of our principal supervisors to be that tight support, monitoring, and supervision of our principals. As I noted earlier, last year we had 6 principal supervisors with a range of schools from 9 to as high as 35 or 36. Thanks to support from the Wallace Foundation and our school board and the advocacy of our superintendent, we were able to add 3 new principal supervisors for this current school year, which brings our total to 9 and has significantly reduced our principal supervision, particularly in our Title I high school feeder patterns, which are our high poverty schools that would benefit from a smaller, more intimate coaching experience from their principal supervisor. In addition, we are in the process of working with Queen's University to tailor an existing executive coaching program they have. Queens happens to have one of the only, I believe, executive coaching program in North America, and we have approached them about designing an executive coaching program that is specifically for principal supervisors. That design work is going on right now, so we don't have a product yet, but we will be piloting that executive coaching program with our principal supervisors beginning in January of 2015. I would also share with individuals on the webinar that we also believe in thinking thoughtfully about succession planning for our principal supervisors. So in each of our learning communities, we have an executive director. That executive director has most often been a sitting principal, typically in more than one school, one type of school, or even multiple levels. And so this is a person that will also participate in that executive coaching as we're trying to begin to prepare our future principal supervisors in the district by having this executive director position in each of our learning communities to be a part of that team. We're also working closely with the new teacher project on some instructional monitoring training for our principal supervisors and our executive directors. That training began last spring and has continued this fall and really has a focus on what it is that our principal supervisors should be looking for as they go into classrooms, and really using their weekly meetings as a means to calibrate and make sure that we're all looking at a classroom with the same lens. And as the last bullet indicates, we actually schedule weekly meetings with principal supervisors, and although that seems like a lot of meeting time, that's for a half a day in the afternoon so that our principal supervisors can be in their schools in the morning, and that's one thing that we try to do as a district, is make sure that our principal supervisors are not called to meetings before 1 o'clock each day, in order that they can be in schools, walking the building with principals, meeting with teams of teachers, or meeting with the leadership team to provide that support. But we have found over the last 4 or 5 years that these weekly meetings are invaluable in terms of making sure that we're staying aligned, that we're staying within guardrails that we have created in terms of what we fondly call non-negotiables in Charlotte in terms of instruction. That when it comes time to do principal evaluations, we actually calibrate those evaluations and compare across our non-learning communities, you know, the evaluation of a first-year principal versus struggling principal versus a highly effective principal, so that we have an opportunity to make sure that, again, our lens for evaluating our principals is aligned. So these meetings serve as an opportunity certainly to conduct business, to have connections with members of the teaching and learning team, our accountability team, our technology team, as well as an opportunity to provide regular professional development. Next slide. As we think about some of our next steps, and I would want to emphasize that this is a journey for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools, that we want to continue to focus on strengthening our internal capacity to build strong principals and make our work with Wallace a sustainable one. As you saw earlier in the presentation, we have strong partnerships with many of our higher ed partners in the area, and we believe that our next opportunity is really to think about our capacity as a district to develop our own principal preparation program that we might present to the state of North Carolina for approval. That's in the early stages of planning. But our success in getting that alignment tight in the preparation program has really caused us to think about what that next step could be. We're going to continue to evaluate the impact of our principal preparation programs. We'll have our leader tracking system to do that, to actually see what are the student achievement results for principals coming out of our different principal partner programs. What impact is that induction program having on the retention of our best principals? And how can we continue to improve our recruiting, selection, and hiring process that at the end makes that lift for our principal supervisors lighter? The other thing is we have a number of other district initiatives, Project Lift being probably most noteworthy in terms of an effort focused specifically on 9 schools in one particular high school feeder pattern. It's been a unifying effort of our entire philanthropic community here in Charlotte with a $55 million investment in these 9 schools. And so we've learned much from Project Lift that has been able to be scaled across the district. Success by Design is really an opportunity to think about how we make sure that our struggling students are touched by our most effective teachers. And then most recently we launched the Beacon Initiative, which is focused on 14 of our low-performing schools and what it is we need to do in terms of supervision and support of those principals in order to see rapid gains for our students. We want to continue to look at the leader tracking system and think about ways that we can strengthen how we use data to inform our principal supervisors as they make decisions when they have vacancies in the schools in their particular learning community, and how we continue to make information readily available to those principal supervisors. We will also explore the opportunity as we begin our budget process in November to think of if there are ways that we can continue to reduce that principal supervisor to principal ratio. We're committed to getting that ratio as small as we can. We have about 18 high school feeder patterns, so ultimately we would love maybe not to have a supervisor for every one of those high school feeder patterns, but to continue to use that as an organizer or a way of organizing our principals. Over my 32-year career in Charlotte, we've had our principals organized by level, by geographic region, by high school, and our principals have given us feedback that this organization through a high school feeder pattern has really allowed great vertical articulation and has allowed our learning communities to be much smaller. I'll stop there and see if there are questions that have been submitted or if there are opportunities.
And we haven't seen any questions come in, but I did send a notice out to the participants inviting them to write questions in the chat box. And I'll say that if there are questions that occur to you after the fact, you can feel free to email those to me and I'll pass them along to Ann. My email address is norij@nassp.org. We will be happy to follow up with you as much as we can. Ann, I want to thank you again. Really appreciate your time and the energy that you put into putting this together for us today. And I'd like to point out to our participants that we have some resources in the PowerPoint which will be on our website within 48 hours along with the recording of the audio. So those resources are from the Wallace Foundation, could be very helpful to you working in this area and other areas related to principal development and the research that Wallace has done in those. Again, thank you to the Wallace Foundation for sponsoring this webinar and others in our series. We appreciate the work that's happening there and the support that's coming from them in the area of principal development. And last but not least, I'd like to invite all of you who are on the webinar to San Diego in February 19th through 21st this year, our annual conference, Ignite 15. We will be at San Diego, and that link at the bottom of the slide is where you can go to register, nasspconference.org/register. Again, the slides will be available on our website, so you can get to that live link in the next day or so. Again, thank you, Ann, very much. We appreciate it. I'm going to close the webinar at this point and ask that all of you keep tuned in for the new ones that are coming up, and thank you. Keep up the good work in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. We really appreciate having you here today. Take care.
Absolutely.